Guidance in the readings in the back of our hymnal. This is 593, Liberation is Costly by Desmond Tutu. Liberation is costly. Even after the Lord had delivered the Israelites from Egypt, they had to travel through the desert. They had to bear the responsibilities and difficulties of freedom. There was starvation and thirst, and they kept complaining. They complained that their diet was monotonous. Many of them preferred the days of bondage in the flesh pots of Egypt. We must remember that liberation is costly. It needs unity. We must hold hands and refuse to be divided. We must be ready. Some of us will not see the day of our liberation physically, but those people will have contributed to the struggle. Let us be united. Let us be filled with hope. Let us be those who respect one another. Well, good morning and welcome to Community Unitarian Universalist Congregation in White Plains, New York, and land formerly known as the home of the Lenape Nation. I'm Jeff Tomlinson, and we are glad you are with us today. It's good to be together.
Hello, I'm Adine Usher. The mission of our congregation is to nurture each other in our spiritual journeys, foster compassion and understanding within and beyond our community, and engage in service to transform ourselves and our world.
And I'm Adam Kent, music director for this congregation. Here in the Unitarian Universalist tradition, we remember and celebrate that it's a blessing you were born, it matters what you do, your experience of the divine is true, and you don't have to go it alone.
The 13 oil lights lit today indicate it is the 13th and last Sunday of spring. Summer begins on Wednesday, June 21st at 10:58 in the morning. The moon is in its new moon phase.
We are celebrating Pride Month, and today is Autistic Pride Day, as well as Father's Day. And tomorrow is Juneteenth, which we are honoring in our service today.
Our theme for June is shadow. Copies of On the Journey, exploring this topic, are in the foyer. Our journey groups are small groups that meet each month from September through June to explore a monthly theme. We'll have signups for next year's groups available starting in the fall. And now it's time for our You Can rundown.
You can stay after worship today and attend the congregation forum presented by the Article 2 Learning Community. We'll hear more about that shortly.
You can support our meal ministry. Each Monday, the Meals for Hope cooking team is busy in the kitchen and welcomes extra help.
You can watch the live stream of Sunday worship at General Assembly here on June 25th. We will gather at 11 a.m. on the 25th instead of 10 a.m. with childcare starting at 10:45. Then you can stay after worship on the 25th to celebrate Arturo Cruz Avellan at his high school graduation party.
You can offer support for our newly arrived family from Afghanistan as they settle in White Plains. Contact Robin Roque and Jane Dixon.
You can enjoy Adam's weekly live concerts online at 3 p.m. on Fridays until the end of June. Then tune back in when he returns again in September.
You can be an informal greeter at our summer worship services. Just come 15 minutes early and welcome folks at the door.
And you can visit our YouTube video channel to see past services, as well as our Odyssey programs, where longtime members share the stories of their lives and faith. For the details about all these stories and more, see your eCommunitarian.
And now, we give a special welcome to our visitors. If you are new today and are comfortable being recognized, please wave a hand so that we may welcome you. And if you are new here today online, please introduce yourself in the chat. Those online can find a link to the order of service on our website at cuucwp.org. For June, our Share the Plate funds go to Furniture Share House. You may make a check with the memo Share the Plate -furniture and add it in the collection plate or mail to the office. You can also use the donate button on our website to contribute online to the plate share, as well as for your pledge and for the minister's discretionary fund.
If you have a joy, sorrow, or milestone you'd like to share, you may write it in our Joys and Sorrows book on the table in the back to my right. For those of you at home on Zoom, please enter it into the chat. Please make this first word to be joy, sorrow, or milestone. And if you are interested in becoming a member of CUUC, please speak to the Reverend Meredith or contact the office to make an appointment.
And now, a special report from Gary Freiberger for the Article 2 Learning Community.
Good morning. We will be holding our third meeting of the Article 2 Learning Community today at 11:45 in Fellowship Hall. It will be a hybrid meeting. We will be discussing the results of the Article 2 congregational poll and any additional input you may have. This meeting will be the last opportunity to have your voice heard prior to our delegates attending the General Assembly on June 21st. Hope you decide to come.
Good morning. I'm Kim. I'm your hymn leader this morning. And if you haven't had a chance to yet, I invite you to silence your cell phones. And then I invite you to rise in body or spirit for our opening hymn. It's number 361, Enter, Rejoice, and Come In the gray hymnal. And those of you who are here on Zoom, hello. You can find the lyrics on page 5 in our online order of service, and you can find that on our website. So I invite you to rise in body or spirit for our joyful opening hymn. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Open your ears to the song. Open your ears to the song. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Open your hearts, everyone. Open your hearts, everyone. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Don't be afraid of some change. Don't be afraid of some change. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Today will be a joyful day. Enter, rejoice, and come in. Thank you. Please be seated.
On the 13th and final Sunday of the season, we dedicate our chalice to the sixth source of the living tradition we share. Spiritual teachings of the earth, centered traditions which celebrate the sacred circle of life that instruct us to live in harmony with the rhythms of nature. Please join me in the chalice lighting words from Griswold Williams. We invite those at home and in the children's area to light your chalices too. Love is the doctrine of this congregation. The quest of truth is its sacrament, and service is its prayer. To dwell together in peace, to seek knowledge and freedom, to serve human need, to end that all souls shall grow into harmony with the divine. Thus do we covenant.
This is the Juneteenth Minute, the origins of Juneteenth. The celebration started with the freed enslaved people of Galveston, Texas. Although the Emancipation Proclamation freed enslaved folks in the South in 1863, it could not be enforced in places until after the end of the Civil War in 1865. Laura Smalley, freed from a plantation near Belleville, Texas, remembered in a 1941 interview that her former plantation owner had gone to fight in the Civil War and came home without telling his enslaved workers what had happened. Old Master, he didn't tell them, that they were free, Smalley said at the time. I think they said they worked them 6 months after that. 6 months. And then they turned them loose on the 19th of June. That's why, we celebrate that day. Union Major General Gordon Granger and his troops arrived at Galveston on June 19, 1865, with news that the war had ended and that the enslaved were now free. That was more than 2 months after Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered to Union General Ulysses S. Grant in Virginia. Granger delivered General Order No. 3, which said, "The people of Texas are informed that, in accordance with a proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. This involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves, and the connection heretofore existing between them becomes that between employer and hired labor. The next year, the now free people started celebrating Juneteenth in Galveston. Its observance has continued around the nation and the world since. Events include concerts, parades, and readings of the Emancipation Proclamation.
This excerpt is taken from Nelson Mandela's autobiography, Long Walk to Freedom. I always knew that deep down in every human heart, there is mercy and generosity. No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin or his background or his religion. People must learn to hate. And if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. For love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite. Even in the grimmest of times, in prison, when my comrades and I were pushed beyond our limits, I would see a glimmer of humanity in one of the guards, perhaps just for a second, but it was enough to reassure me and to keep me going. Man's goodness is a flame that can be hidden, but never extinguished. It was during those long and lonely years that my hunger for the freedom of my own people became a hunger for the freedom of all people, white and black. I knew as well as I knew anything that the oppressor must be liberated just as surely as the oppressed. A man who takes away another's freedom is a prisoner of hatred. He is locked behind the bars of prejudice and narrow-mindedness. I am not truly free if I am taking away someone else's freedom, just as surely as I am not free when my freedom is taken from me. The oppressed and the oppressor alike are robbed of their humanity. When I walked out of prison, that was my mission, to liberate the oppressed and the oppressor both. Some say that has now been achieved, but I know that that is not the case. We have not taken the final step of the journey, but the first step on a longer and even more difficult road. For to be free is not merely to cast off one's chains, but to live in a way that respects and enhances the freedom of others. The true test of our devotion to freedom is just beginning.
Scott Joplin is best remembered as the quote-unquote king of ragtime, this musical form that derives its name for the way it ragged or syncopated the rhythms of conventional marches and other kinds of simple dances. It's worth reflecting, though, this Juneteenth on Scott Joplin's own personal bitterness and disillusionment at the time of his death, that he was not accepted into the classical music world. He had composed an opera Trementia that would take 60 years after his passing to be premiered. So here is his Peacherine Rag.
Shall we pray? Dear world of all color, the yellows and reds of blossoms, the bountiful green of plant life in June through much of the northern hemisphere, the blue sky, orange sunset, and the ultraviolet that we humans cannot see, but many birds and some mammals can, and the infrared that some other animals can sense, and all the beiges, tans, pinks, browns, blacks, ebonies, olives, alabasters, ivories, and bisques of human skin. Dear world of colorful people, colorful languages, colorful cultures, and colorful beings, we breathe in a new day, and we hear birds singing and see the squirrels frisk and chatter. We are swimming in mystery, floating in beauty, even as we also bear the burdens of pain and grief and tragedy. As the water recedes in Lake Powell, the second largest U.S. reservoir, we know the water shortage is impinging on many lives, even as the falling water levels reveal a beauty of deep red rock canyons and otherworldly arches. Beauty and tragedy forever blend and mesh. Our hearts go out to the people of the Philippines, where the Mount Mayon volcano has made nearly 13,000 evacuate their homes. Our hearts go out to persecuted religious minorities throughout the world. In Pakistan, more than 50 non-Muslims are currently incarcerated, some facing execution under the country's blasphemy laws. Elsewhere, it's Muslims who face suspicion, hostility, or worse. May we remember that we all belong to one another. May we be advocates of the powerful truth of inclusive love. And may we thus enhance the color of the world. Our hearts go out to the 4 indigenous children who survived 40 days in the Amazon jungle in Colombia after their plane crashed, and to the military and indigenous communities who worked jointly to find them. Our hearts rise in hope as we learn that Australia has taken the step of making consent education mandatory in all schools from kindergarten to high school. We're grateful for the work of Chanel Contos, who started the campaign for public schools to teach the need that sexual relations have affirmative consent. May we all embrace the variety of colors that permeate our world, and may no one be embraced against their will. May we see one another with loving eyes and an open heart. And our hearts go out to the migrants drowned Wednesday when an overloaded boat capsized in the open Mediterranean waters off of Greece. Hundreds are dead or feared dead, as about 750 people were believed to be on the boat. Our hearts are troubled by the news that Russian nuclear weapons have been moved to Belarus, and that the United States has sent a nuclear-powered guided missile submarine to South Korea in a show of force. May our hopes for peace and justice give us courage to make it so. And may we delight always in what is good, confront what is cruel, and heal what is broken. To share a moment of silence together where we hold all that has been said and celebrated and all else that we are holding today on our hearts. Blessed be. Amen.
May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be well. May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be well. May I be peaceful and at ease. May I be whole. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be well. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be well. May you be peaceful and at ease. May you be whole. May we be filled with loving kindness. May we be well. May we be filled with loving kindness. May we be well. May we be peaceful and at ease. May we be whole.
I don't ordinarily speak before musical meditations, but I will make an exception today to contextualize this piece. Joseph Boulogne, who was popularly known as Le Chevalier de Saint-Georges, was the subject of a recent Hollywood film called Chevalier, which I think was come and gone in the blink of an eye last month. But he was popularly known as the Black Mozart. And his life and career remind us that colonialization and slavery were not unique to the United States in this hemisphere. He was born on the island of Guadeloupe in 1739 when it was a French colony. His mother had been a slave from Senegal. As a young man, he emigrated to France, where he became a distinguished composer, violinist, and fencer in the court of Louis XVI before the French Revolution. And this is a recently discovered keyboard work of his.
We take a moment now to extend to one another our wishes for and blessings of peace. Please turn and pass the peace to those around you. Those joining us online, please greet each other in the chat.
Go forever. See if I can do it. Good morning. The living tradition we share draws on spiritual teachings of earth-centered traditions which celebrate the sacred circle of life and instruct us to live in harmony with the rhythms of nature. Let there be an offering to sustain and strengthen this place of celebration of the sacred circles of life. Let there be this time in the rhythm of the week for ordinary and happy discipline of giving. Gratitude gives birth to generosity, and generosity gives birth to gratitude. And both of them grow in our lives through the rhythm of regular practice. Therefore, let there be an offering.
Tell me why, tell me why, tell me why. Why can't we live together? Tell me why, tell me why. Why can't we live together? Everybody wants to live together. Why can't we live together? No more wars, no more wars, no more wars. Just a little peace in this world. No more wars, no more wars. All we want is some peace in this world.
Our next hymn is number 151, I Wish I Knew How. It was written by jazz pianist Billy Taylor. It actually started out as an instrumental. It was the music bed of a well-known BBC show, and full lyrics were added later with the help of lyricist Dick Dallas. It was recorded in November of '63, and it went on to serve as an anthem in the civil rights movement in America in the '60s. So Billy's daughter gave some context for us later about how the lyrics evolved. And she said, Dad initially recorded it as an instrumental, but as I recall, he had written the first verse of lyrics pretty early on. He got stuck at one point and he invited his friend to collaborate with him to finish the lyrics, and that's how we got those later verses. I've always felt there was a difference between the first verse and the later ones. I think you hear my dad's voice most clearly in the first verse. So I invite you to rise in body or spirit, for I wish I knew how. I wish I knew how it would feel to be free. I wish I could break all these chains holding me. I wish I could say all the things I could say. Say them loud, say them clear, for the whole world to hear. Say them loud, say them clear, for the whole world to hear. I wish I could share all the love in my heart. Remove all the bars that still us apart. I wish you could know what it means to be me. Then you'd see and agree everyone should be free. Then you'd see and agree everyone should be free. I wish I could get you all the love. I wish I could live like I'm longing to live. I wish I could do all the things I can do. Though I'm way overdue, I'd be starting anew. Though I'm way overdue, I'd be starting anew. I wish I could be like a bird in the sky. How sweet it would be if I found I could fly. I'd soar to the sun and look down at the sea. Then I'd sing 'cause I'd know how it feels to be free. Then I'd sing 'cause I'd know how it feels to be free.
It's great that we're contextualizing all these songs today, because that's what liberation theology is. It's a contextualization of theology to our present life. Years ago, I came across an article about liberation that focused on the story of Jesus and how his work of delivering God's love was directed toward the poor and the oppressed. I found this interpretation of the Bible to be from a social justice lens to be very fascinating for me. It wasn't until years later that I realized the article was written by Reverend Gustavo Gutierrez, a Roman Catholic theologian, Dominican priest in Peru, who is considered one of the founders of liberation theology. Gutierrez argues that all through the Bible, including Exodus and the works of Jesus, the stories mirror God's predilection for the weak and the abused of human history, of God's love for the oppressed. Gutierrez was concerned about the poverty and oppression of people in his region and asserted that theology must be a critical reflection on humankind, on basic human principles. Only with this approach will theology be a serious discourse, aware of itself and in full possession of its conceptual elements. Gutierrez speaks of three kinds of liberation. Liberation from social injustice, that is, freedom from all forms of social, political, and economic oppression. Second, liberation from poverty, and recognition that suffering comes not from God, but from human and historical injustice. And third, a liberation from sin. Even though this liberation theology has its roots in the poverty and oppression of Latin America, Gutierrez states the marginalization of the Amerindian and the Black community and the contempt in which they are held are situations we cannot, as human beings, accept, much less as Christians. The second source of liberation theology I would like to visit today is Reverend James Cone's, who's often named as the founder of Black liberation theology. Cone established both Scripture and the Black experience as central to his explorations. Reverend Cone states, "I knew that before I could say anything worthwhile about God and the Black situation of oppression in America, I had to discover a theological identity that was accountable to the life, history, and culture of African American people." Just as Gutierrez did, Cone found the story of Jesus' life to be an affirmation of God's preference for oppressed people over the powerful. And for Cone, this meant African Americans. Reverend Cone said, "To be fully human is to be involved, participating in social structures for human liberation." That people recognize that freedom becomes reality when they throw in their lot with an oppressed community by joining in with its cause, accepting whatever is necessary in order to be identified with the victim. The problem for many white groups is that of truly becoming identified with the Black community. To be free is to participate with those who are victims of oppression. Persons are free when they belong to a community seeking to emancipate itself from oppression. Freedom means taking sides when a society is divided into the oppressed and the oppressors. We are not permitted the luxury of being on neither side. Our decision affects the whole of society, and it cannot be made but in the view of the oppressed and the oppressors. Reverend Cone states the truly free are identified with the humiliated because they know that their own being is involved in the degradation of their own brothers and sisters. They cannot stand to see them stripped of their humanity. This is not because of pity or sympathy, but because their own existence is being limited by another's slavery. Cone asserts that freedom is something more than intellectual articulation of an existential philosophical attitude. It involves the commitment of one's whole being for the cause of the oppressed. So now, for many years now, Unitarian Universalism has also discussed liberation. Before that conversation, Unitarian minister James Luther Adams, who directly experienced Nazi Germany and speaks, as we know, of the 5 smooth stones of religious liberalism, says that the second smooth stone is that all relations between persons ought ideally rest on mutual, free consent and not on coercion. Adams believed that the freedom to come together with others can be a dynamic institutional force for social change or for resistance to it. Adams clarifies that freedom involves more than the freedom of choice. Many people entertain attitudes in favor of freedom, but socially effective freedom requires participation in associations that define or redefine freedom and that attempt to articulate or implement the freedom in specific social milieu. Reverend Frederick John Muir, in A Reason for Hope, a book about liberation theology, states, "There's an urgent need for Unitarian Universalists to translate personal, community, and association beliefs like our principles into the language of liberation theology in order to make clear our support for the liberation of life." In more recent years, UUs have pointed out that the sanctuary movement that we've engaged in has its roots in liberation theology. Even those humanists who do not identify with Christianity agree with the basic tenets that a moral life involves advocating for the poor, marginalized, disenfranchised people in society. A program for youth exploring their Unitarian Universalist faith called Tapestry of Faith reported that many Unitarian Universalist ministers and theologians suggest that liberal attempts to work for human freedom is not enough, and that we have much to learn from liberation theology. The program asks, how can we learn from liberation theology so that our liberal tradition can engage in more liberating and transformative work for freedom? Reverend Paul Reiser states, while we can and should draw on the resources and insights of other traditions like liberation theology, liberal theology must speak first to the tradition it serves, which is basically a middle-class social structures, a religious tradition. We must ask, in what ways are we implicated in social structures of oppression? What are our various privileges in current social structures? And how are they connected with, even dependent on the suffering of others? How might our own practices unwittingly perpetuate the oppressive structures we are seeking to overturn? How can we use our privilege to effect change and alleviate suffering? What are we willing to give up? Reverend Jillian states, our theology says that we are all saved, and salvation is what we strive to build now for each other. So we resist any laws, policies, or practices that deny anyone their humanity. We know that now on earth is our chance to create heaven. We know that love crosses borders and prison walls, lives in queer families and disability justice organizers, thrives among trans young people and working class elders. Reverend Sophia Bentoncourt, nominated to most likely be our next UUA president, states that our first principle calls us to learn the language of resilience and liberation in response to the pain of this world we have inherited, so that we might find wholeness and grace in our brokenness. A universalist theology of liberation in the present day centers our capacity to be sanctuaries of radical truth and abundant compassion, so that the all-embracing love at the center of our tradition can serve to make us all of us whole again. Reinterpretation of our theological legacies in these times should be liberatory and articulate our commitment to affirming and welcoming those who have been marginalized in our larger society within our communities and organizations. We need to articulate a theology of liberation, experimentation, and innovation grounded in our Unitarian Universalist principles and sources of inspiration. Developing a shared theology that centers on helping on earth manifest and point the way toward liberation, along with experimentation that strives for our collective flourishing. This theology will also call us to be accountable to the legacies of our past deeds and to work for an equitable future. This will lay the groundwork for our work around truth, transformation, and reparations. Reverend Morrison Reed, a Unitarian Universalist minister from Toronto and African American, calls liberalism and liberation two distinct models of freedom. Liberalism focuses on providing opportunities for individuals to be free, while liberation is an ongoing struggle to create and restore relationships that free people and communities from systems of oppression. Liberation theology is still unfolding, still developing, still pregnant with possibility for more revelations. Liberation is more than freedom declared by governments and delivered by soldiers. It is a freedom from all forms of social, economic, and spiritual oppression. It is a transcendence over our drives for domination and a transformation of human relations. We know that we are a liberal faith. The question before us is whether we are a faith of liberation, whether we truly recognize that we are, all of us, caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, that interpersonal web of all existence, that the oppressed and the oppressor alike are robbed of their humanity, and that our liberation must be a collective mutual liberation for all. After our musical interlude, we'll hear from Jillian Baez.
The song What's Going On had an inspiration from Obie Benson. He was the bass in the Four Tops. We'll see him in a minute. That's an interview he's giving. And then we'll see those guys performing in the lower corner. The band were touring the US, and they hit Berkeley, California in 1969, May 1969. And while they were there, Benson witnessed police brutality, violence, during protests held by anti-war activists. He was rattled by the situation, and he asked, what is happening here? One question led to another. Why are they sending kids so far away from their families overseas? Why are they attacking their own children in our streets? He was upset, and he discussed what he witnessed with his friend and songwriter Al Cleveland, who in turn wrote and composed a song that reflected what Benson was grappling with. Benson wanted to give the song to his group, and they said, we don't want to do any protest songs. And he said, it's not a protest song. He said, no, man, it's a love song. It's about love and understanding. I'm not protesting. I just want to know what's going on. And so a few months later, Benson came and gave the untitled song to Marvin Gaye, and he lived with it, added a little more melody, revised the song a little bit, and Marvin Gaye titled it, What's Going On? So Gaye himself had been inspired by all the social ills in our country, and he was especially affected by the 1965 Watts riot, where police brutality was being protested. And that was a turning point for him when he asked himself, with the world exploding around me, how am I supposed to keep singing love songs? He was also influenced by emotional conversations he had with his veteran brother who had served in Vietnam, who was deeply impacted by his service there. So Marvin Gaye called Gordy Berry, the guy who led up Motown Records, and he said, I want to record this song. And Gordy said, Marvin, don't be ridiculous. It's taking things too far. No one wants to hear a protest song. So I hope you'll join your voices with me while we grapple with what's going on.
Mother, mother, there's far too many of you crying. Brother, 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 there's far too many of you dying. You know we've got to find a way to bring some love in here today. Father, Father, we don't need to escalate. You see, war is not the answer, for only love can conquer hate. You know we've got to find a way to bring some love in here today. Picket lines and picket signs, don't punish me with brutality. Talk to me so you can see what's going on, what's going on, yeah, what's going on, hey, what's going on. Mother, mother, everybody thinks we're wrong. Oh, but who are they to judge us just because our hair is long? Oh, you know we've got to find a way to bring some understanding here today. Picket lines and picket signs, don't punish me with brutality. Oh, talk to me so you can see what's going on. Hey, what's going on? Hey, what's going on? Yeah, what's going on? Please, what's going on? Tell me, please, brothers and sisters, what's going on?
Good morning. Bell Hooks was a Black feminist writer and thinker born and raised in Kentucky who published nearly 40 books before she passed in 2021. Love is a recurring theme in her work, and she views love as the solution to what she frequently called white capitalist patriarchy. Her writing always had an intersectional focus that called our attention to overlapping issues of race, gender, and class. She argued that the practice of love and freedom are inextricably connected. In her 1994 essay called Love as the Practice of Freedom, Hooks writes, "In this society, there is no powerful discourse on love emerging either from politically progressive radicals or from the left. The absence of a sustained focus on love in progressive circles arises from a collective failure to acknowledge the needs of the spirit and an overdetermined emphasis on material concerns. Without love, our efforts to liberate ourselves and our world community from oppression and exploitation are doomed. As long as we refuse to address fully the place of love in struggles for liberation, we will not be able to create a culture of conversion where there is a mass turning away from an ethic of domination. Without an ethic of love, shaping the direction of our political vision and our radical aspirations, we are often seduced, in one way or the other, into continued allegiance to systems of domination, imperialism, sexism, racism, classism. It has always puzzled me that women and men who spend a lifetime working to resist and oppose one form of domination can be systematically supporting another. I have been puzzled by powerful visionary Black male leaders who can speak and act passionately in resistance to racial domination and accept and embrace sexist domination of women, by feminist white women who work daily to eradicate sexism, but who have major blind spots when it comes to acknowledging and resisting racism and white supremacist domination on the planet. Critically examining these blind spots, I conclude that many of us are motivated to move against domination solely when we feel our self-interest directly threatened. Often then, the longing is not for collective transformation of society, an end to politics of domination, but rather simply for an end to what we feel is hurting us. This is why we desperately need an ethic of love to intervene in our self-centered longing for change. Hooks goes on to note the limits of the reformist civil rights movement of the 1960s, but notes that it was rooted in an ethic of love, which shifted into an ethic of power in the 1970s. For us, perhaps, the most powerful invocation she offers us as Unitarians is to remember that, open quote, Choosing love, we also choose to live in community, and that means that we do not have to change by ourselves, end quote. Similarly, Gloria Anzaldúa, a feminist Chicana writer and thinker, and by Chicana I mean someone of Mexican American descent who considers themselves socially and politically conscious. She's from South Texas. Also focused her writings on understanding the linkages between liberation and love and dismantling racism, sexism, and poverty. And in indirect ways was also speaking as a contemporary to Bell Hooks and passed in 2004. Weaving an intersectional perspective into liberation theology, Anzaldúa was particularly concerned with issues of gender and sexuality in the context of the US-Mexico borderlands. Self-love and consciousness are the main tools Anzaldúa identified for the decolonization of Chicana and other women of color, what she called the new mestiza, or the mixed race woman, noting that, and there's a common saying within Chicano culture that they are both the descendants of the colonizer and the colonized, right? And there's this constant having to work with that dual identity in history. In keeping with our theme of the shadow this month and Reverend Meredith's sermon 2 weeks ago, Anzaldúa also thought about Jung and the shadow and the process of individuation or becoming whole. And rewriting Jung's process of individuation with a social justice lens, she argued that the path of conocimiento, and by conocimiento, there's a number of ways we can understand that term as we translate it from Spanish into English. We can think about it as consciousness, as knowledge, even as recognition. And so she talks about this path of conocimiento as a walkway to change. It guides every one of us to start from within and then to use our inner selves in spiritual activism. Anzaldúa identifies this path as a 7-part process. She writes in her 2002 anthology, This Bridge We Call Home, Radical Visions for Transformation, that, open quote, tu camino de conocimiento, your consciousness path, requires that you encounter your shadow side and confront what you've programmed yourself and have been programmed by your cultures to avoid, desconocer, to confront traits and habits distorting how you see reality and inhibiting the full use of your facultades, your faculties. After this path, the next stage is what she calls Nepantla, which is a Nahuatl word. It's an indigenous word for an in-between space. Seeing Nepantla as a site of transformation, the place where different perspectives come into conflict and where you question the basic ideas, the zones between changes where you struggle to find equilibrium between the outer expression of change and your inner relationship to it. The next stage is complete darkness as a new identity begins to emerge from the previous spiritual isolation, similar to what some of us might call or may have experienced a dark night of the soul. The 4th stage is reconnection and healing of both the body and mind, and seeing the linkages between the body and mind. The 5th stage involves a desire for order and meaning, a new script that realigns the inner self with discoveries from the shadows and the reconnections. The penultimate stage consists of presenting this new script to others, oftentimes unsuccessfully, and dealing with a clash of realities. The strategy acquired in the final and 7th stage solves this clash of realities to establish a common ground, a blend of ethics and compassion, along with a shift of realities, engages spiritual activism. The 7-fold process hopefully leads us to a new paradigm operating within us. And perhaps some of you or all of you are on this path as I speak right now at some point in this process. And I hope you will join me in a personal and collective transformation through a commitment to love in the ongoing quest for liberation. Thank you.
Our closing hymn is Lift Every Voice and Sing. It's a hymn we know well. James Weldon Johnson was one of the writers. He was the chair of the Florida Baptist Academy in Jacksonville, and he wanted to write a poem about the commemoration of Abraham Lincoln's birthday. So he sat down to write, And really what he was moved to do was to write a poem which was themed around the struggles of African Americans following the Reconstruction era. And that included the passage of the Jim Crow laws in the South. So Lift Every Voice and Sing was first recited as a poem by 500 kids at the same time in a school in 1900. So Weldon Johnson's brother, Jay Rosamond, would later hear that and set it to music, which is how we know it today. So in the years that followed, Lift Every Voice and Sing was sung within Black communities, and Johnson reflected and said, you know, those school children in Jacksonville kept singing it, and then they went off to other schools and sang it, and they became the teachers and taught it to other children. So it spread across all of the places that they visited. So within 20 years, it was sung all over the South and in some other parts of the country too, without any formal way of, here's some sheet music and the MP3 for you to learn it from. In 1919, the NAACP dubbed Lift Every Voice and Sing the Black National Anthem. For its power, it voiced a cry for liberation and affirmation for African American people. And James Weldon Johnson would be appointed to serve as the NAACP's first executive secretary the following year. So I invite you to rise in body or spirit to lift our voices together for Lift Every Voice and Sing.
Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of new day begun, let us march on till victory is won. Stony the road we trod, bitter the chastening rod, felt in the days when hope unborn had died, yet with a steady beat have not our weary feet come to the place for which our forebears sighed. We have come over a way that the tears have watered. Have come treading our path through the blood of the slaughtered. Out where the gloomy past, till now we stand at last, where the white gleam of our bright star is cast. God of our wearies, God of our silent tears, thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, thou who hast by thy might led us into the light, keep us forever in the path we pray. Lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met thee, lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. Shadowed beneath thy hand, may we forever stay.
Thank you. And I'll ask you to remain standing for our chalice extinguishing.
Okay. Thank you for being with us this morning. Please join me in gratitude for our worship team, music director, Adam Kent, the greeters, the ushers, and the tech team. Our coffee hour today will be in Fellowship Hall, so folks can join the Article 2 forum beginning at 11:45. Those with us online may log out of this Zoom and log into the Article 2 forum, or you may log into our virtual coffee hour. The links are on our website, and we will post them in the chat. Please be remembered to put your name tag in the basket in the lobby when you leave today. Now the extinguishing chalice.
As we extinguish the chalice here, we invite those at home and in the children's area to extinguish their chalices as well. Now please join me in saying our chalice extinguishing words. The circle of our worship has come around to full. We have lit our chalice and now extinguished it. One circle within the sacred circles of life. One note within the harmony of life's rhythm.
May you find ways to break the chains that bind you. And if you don't know how, here's a way. Find someone whose chains are heavier than yours and help break them. For it is in the work of collective liberation that we come into our own greatest freedom. Go in peace.
Spirit of life, come unto me. Sing in my heart all the stirrings of compassion. Blow in the wind, rise in the sea. Move in the hand, giving life the shape of justice. Roots hold me close, wings set me free. Spirit of life, come to me, come to me.
Generación, exclusivamente triunfaremos, con el poder colectivo ganaremos, como un fuego continuaremos, como el sol creceremos. Un millón de pies, somos un millón para una, somos un millón de pies, somos un millón para una, somos un millón de pies.